Hello everybody and welcome back to Dante Armour's Gaming and Tech News Update episode 5, and as you can tell by the title, we are going to be having a look at the i9-9900K. Yes, so Principal Technologies, or PT as I'm going to refer to them in this video, were commissioned by Intel to benchmark the performance of their new flagship CPU, which Intel's claiming is going to be the world's best gaming processor. So Intel, who commissioned PT to completely benchmark their new CPU, apparently the world's best CPU, against AMD's 2700X and 6 other processors, including the same generation of Intel and different AMD processors. And this was just to be able to show you sort of what they can do with this generation. Once PT had done this benchmarking, it was then sent on over to Intel, who then published it over on their newsroom. Basically, there's the title, suggesting that it was the best gaming processor ever, and then use that as their own document. So obviously they paid for this, it is theirs, they are publishing it out there saying it is the best, this is what it can do, and claiming at points that it's 50% better than AMD's 2700X. Which obviously, judging by everything that we've seen so far and what other people have come up with, that isn't the case. So yeah, moving on over, so I've made myself quite a few notes that I'm going to go through. According to most of the reviewers out there, the launch of Intel's i9-9900K a couple of days ago went absolutely brilliantly, really smooth, everything was on time, everything went to plan, and that's brilliant. You know, they've got a good press team, the press was there, they didn't muck up, no mistakes, everything went as smoothly as possible. However, not the case when PT showed their testing. So if we cast our eyes back over September, for instance, and have a little look at the market share of AMD and Intel. So this graph basically shows the CPUs that were sold between over here AMD and Intel and combined. So Pinnacle Ridge, for AMD got 57%. It was then not closely, but it was then followed by Summit Ridge at 23%, and then Raven Ridge at 18% of their sales, and only 2% was Threadripper, but that's only for sort of the enthusiast content creators, or if you've got enough money, you can go for the Threadripper gaming CPUs. So basically AMD took 2/3 of the market share in September. As you can see over here, this is 65% of the market were buying AMD over 35% buying Intel. So I think Intel looked at this, got a little bit worried and thought, come on, we need to do something here, we need to get some specs out for our new processor, we need to make it look amazing and basically show that AMD isn't all that. However, cost ratios, AMD for what it is absolutely brilliant, it's affordable, where Intel is high-end but really, really expensive and only for enthusiasts. You know, if you've got the money, yeah, go and buy Intel, but if you haven't, you're starting out or you want to try something new, then AMD is taking up that gap where Intel isn't filling, hence why they got 65% of the market share in September. So moving on from that, Intel's i9 processor is running on the new, well, not the new, sorry, it's running on the old 14 nanometer chip with multiple pluses. I think it's plus, 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 plus. There's only so many pluses you can have in a chip until it starts going into negative. But they still made a processor that the consumers wanted, and one of the big changes that they have made is they've gone for soldered IHS, which is listening to feedback of us consumers. People told them and said, we want a soldered IHS, which they have gone and done. So they do listen to feedback, and hopefully they do see these reviews and they do listen to what we have to say. So moving on, with that soldered IHS, might give you an extra couple of 100 megahertz on the clock. However, its technology is a little bit old now. Like I said, it's running on the 14nm chipset. However, they have gone and undone all their hard work and all the hard work from listening to the feedback by releasing what PT has put out there. And like anything, I would normally say take it with a pinch of salt. However, you might need to get the rock and chuck it over your shoulder until the reviews come out on the 18th of October. So far, no one has seen results like this before. And I am talking about things like Tomb Raider Ashes of Singularity. I'm going to get these up now, so no, wrong one. This one here. So, if we just scroll through this, where has it gone? Sorry, Ashes of Singularity, not Tomb Raider, don't know if I said that, but Ashes of Singularity. Apparently the i9 9900K is getting 57, sorry, I'm going nuts, 57.3 frames per second. Yeah, we haven't seen results like this. The 8700K is doing it in 49 frames per second. So not only that is, these are synthetic benchmarks. These are not games, these are synthetic. They are designed to use all the cores of the CPU, and no other game does that, if you can even call this a game. It is a benchmark. It is solely there to benchmark the CPUs, not taking into consideration real world gaming. And obviously Intel has always been better on the high frequencies, because it can reach the frequencies much better than AMD. So yeah, it is going to perform a little bit better. Whether or not it's going to perform this much better, we don't know. But the figures themselves look amazing, but in my opinion, all they're doing is diminishing their reputation and their brand by getting PT to do the benchmarking, and we will go on a bit further into this and show you why. But I don't think the 9900K can do it at 57.3 FPS. I would assume it's doing it more around 51, 52 FPS. So back to the synthetics benchmarks, like I said, they are designed to stress all the cores on a CPU. It's designed to use the whole CPU, all the cores, and push them to their absolute limits. And like I said, no games out there do push the cores to their limits, like a synthetic benchmarks. So how were the tests carried out? What CPUs were used, and however many games? So like I said, 8 CPUs were tested and 19 games were used. So if I bring this back up, here you go. So here is the 8 CPUs that were tested. So 3 from AMD, so the Threadripper 2950X, the 2990WX, and then obviously the Ryzen 7 2700X, and then the other 5 were Intel. So I don't know why they didn't do 4 and 4. It would have been a bit more even on AMD's side, but it already looks like AMD are being sort of pushed out really, and it's more biased towards Intel. The games. Here are all the games that they had tested the synthetic benchmarks on, and this is what they're using across both CPUs, and all of them testing the FPS. But however, they have shown their incompetence here just a little by, and their lack of knowledge, just by simply how they did the tests. And down here, the tables below present our results. We used in-game benchmarks. That's key, in-game benchmarks where possible. Otherwise we used fraps to record the frames per second. Well, not only is this a bit ignorant, but in-game FPS sort of benchmarks, sorry, that's fallen over now. So in-game FPS benchmarks are out and unreliable. They do differ every single time. Mixing software to record the frame rates, again, is different. So they're using software and they're using in-game stuff to test them, and where it's not being bumped up, they're doing it with fraps. So mixing the software doesn't work. It's never a good idea. You shouldn't do it, because you're always going to get inconsistent results. So how did they record the data? Well, this is very interesting. Any person benchmarking, myself, the other YouTubers out there, Gamers Nexus, Jay's 2 cents, Hardware Unboxed, Bit with Kyle, people like that, you would do 3 runs of the benchmark. What you would then do is you add all 3 scores up, divide it by 3, and you've got your average. However, PT in this case did 3 benchmarks and used the medium one, so they used the middle one. No point, you're not going to get a consistent result, you're not going to get true data. You're meant to do it on an average, not a medium, an average, because that's what we're looking for. That's why we buy these products, is on an average FPS. An average, not an average gameplay, because that's wrong to use. It depends on if you're running at 1080p or whether you're going to be running at 4K resolution, but you want an average. And that's where that's where things really start going wrong. So this should have been done the way to get a more reliable test, more reliable result, and more reliable data. Anybody can do this. You can go and do 3 benchmarks and go, oh, I'll take the highest one. Is it going to be the correct result? No. The average is the correct result. So moving on down from all these benchmarks and what they tested and what the system settings they were using, again, another mistake they have made is on their test method. So if I scroll all the way down here you go, and zoom in, they were using a thermal take suppressor F51 mid-tower case. So these are so many variables with this. Not great airflow, but okay, they're using the same case for each CPU. Okay, that's starting to get a little bit better. However, they decided to use a Noctua NH-U14S, which is one of the best air coolers that you can get on the market. It is an aftermarket CPU cooler. They were using the Ryzen's AMD Wraith Prism cooler that came in the box. And again here, the other CPU units did not come with CPU coolers. So there again is fudging the tests. It is mixing the data. If you're going to use what comes in the box, use what's in the box. If there's nothing in the box, you can't use it. If you're going to test it, use the same CPU cooler for each and every single CPU. Use the same thermal paste for every single CPU. Obviously the Threadripper ones are going to have the TR4 base for them, because the Noctuas are different. They do the smaller base and they do the TR4 base. Did they use the TR4 base on the Threadrippers? We don't know, because just a standard Noctua will not cover the whole IHS. So again, only having half the die cooled isn't going to perform greatly. So again, inconsistency. When you're benchmarking, you're doing tests, you're doing data, you're analysing it, you want to cut down your variables as much as possible. Airflow, okay, they're using the same case. Cooler wise, they're using 2 different coolers. Or are they using 3? Obviously Threadripper, we don't know. But you're starting to see inconsistent data. Use the same product for each CPU to then cut out the variables. Again, with case airflow, did they just leave it? Did they bump it up on the Intel ones? Did they lower it on the AMD ones? We don't know. How was the case? How was the airflow consumed? How was it used? So this is the mistakes that they are making. There are cracks within their data, within their results, within their testing, and it can't work. It's not right. Come on, PT, what are you doing? If this is how they test, I don't want to know how everything else went. But not only that, is if you're gonna go through the testing, you'll want to use surely the same kit, which they kind of didn't. So for the memory, they were using I think it was 4 16GB sticks of DDR4 RAM. Brilliant. So 64 gigs, probably overkill, but they had 64 gig in there. They had set the Intel RAM to 2666 megahertz. Okay, brilliant. And they set AMD's to 2933 megahertz. So obviously, as we all know, AMD does better off higher megahertz of RAM to process its data a lot more. But they didn't really set a profile. Again, 2666 on Intel, 2933 on AMD. Again, swaying AMD side this time. However, they didn't adjust the RAM timings. And that is crucial in this, because yeah, it's great having the megahertz on the RAM, but they didn't adjust the RAM timings on the AMD side, which is going to severely screw and sway the results again, because AMD will not be able to keep up with Intel if the settings aren't correct. So they did have the XMP profile there, but they didn't sort the RAM timings. And again, this is another variant. You've got to have these right. You've got to make sure that the RAM timings are correct for the product you're using, because each and every motherboard is different on the settings for the RAM. So yeah, again, a flaw in the test that they had made, which obviously isn't gonna help. And like I said, AMD works better with higher RAM timings, higher RAM frequency, but obviously they didn't apply it properly. So all the tests, like I said, will run out the same case. That's fine. Different air coolers, not great. Different RAM timings, different RAM megahertz or speeds. It's just starting to look a bit of a mess. Nothing was tested correctly. So again, on to another exciting bit is the software that they used. So they used Intel's Boost Technology 2.0 on the Intel chips, and then they used AMD Ryzen Master for the AMD chips. Okay, brilliant, software in place. Starting to look a bit better again. However, they then turned the Ryzen Master's game mode on, which turns an 8-core processor like the 2700X into basically a quad-core processor. Again, limiting AMD's chances of getting anywhere near. Limiting AMD's chances of actually performing decent. So, again, if you're going to test it with the same cores and the same threads. But no, game mode on, half the cores, and you're not going to get a fair result. It's not going to work. And I've actually got a picture of it somewhere around here if I can find it. Here you go. So I'll load this up and zoom on in. There you go, Ryzen Master disabled 4 cores here. So AMD is at a much greater disadvantage than it should have been. And there's the Ashes of Singularity test, which I will get rid of. And that, there you go. So, and this is just going back to the case. This is the case that they used. Looks like a Define R6, should I say? Again, not a bad case, but at least something was the same. At least we can go that route. However, onto their sort of basically disclaimer. They disclaim that they did this on behalf of Intel, and that's great. They tested it. A company comes to you and pays you, says, I want you to test this product. You test it, as long as it's fair testing. However, on Intel's press room, should I say, there was this additional disclaimer. And if we zoom in, software and workloads used in the performance tests may have been optimized for performance only on Intel microprocessors. So that disclaimer there straight away is telling you we didn't have to do all this. It was falsified documents. The data wasn't correct. They used biased opinions against AMD to make sure Intel looked good, because I think Intel is starting to worry. As I said, they're losing the market share. AMD are starting to take that because their processors are getting a lot better. They're getting a lot more competitive. And for instance, an i9 9900K is going to be around about $488 US plus. Whereas if we look at a 2700X, it's going to be around about $330. So for an extra $170, you can have Intel i9 9900K. Why not put that money best towards a bit more RAM and a bit more of an expensive, more GPU, or some other equipment. And this is where AMD is taking over. This is where AMD is starting to eat at Intel, because like Nvidia, they've produced something new, but it's taken them a long time to get there. And Intel have been so comfortable and sat on their throne for so long that they've been complacent and just not releasing anything new. No new technology. The AMD stuff is running on the 12 nanometer project, the processor. They're looking at releasing a 7 nanometer, I think next year or the year after, so 2019, 2020, they're looking at bringing out 7 nanometer. Intel is still running on the old 14 nanometer chipset. So this is where I don't think the results are fair. This is why I think it was biased towards Intel. And if you're gonna do a job properly, PT, do it the same. Make sure all the variables that can be the same are the same, and try and work with what isn't. But don't go screwing the results just to make Intel look good, because it is actually being more detrimental to Intel and their brand than it is helping them. So that's basically my rant over. Thank you for coming along and watching the review. There are other reviewers out there, so do go and check Steve at Gamers Nexus. He explains it in a lot more detail. He goes into a lot more of everything. I know Hardware Unboxed obviously brought up the game mode on Rise and Master, but we're all out there to bring you guys, the public, the consumers that are going to be buying these, a real idea of what's going on. And like I said, take everything with a pinch of salt, or in this case a massive rock, and chuck it over your shoulder. And don't go pre-ordering anything. Make the company work for your money. If you keep pre-ordering everything, they're going to keep putting it out there and falsify the results, and then you're going to be disappointed with the product. Don't pre-order. Wait till the reviews come out. Wait till you see what they're going to be doing, and make these companies work for your hard-earned money, instead of taking reviews or results like PT into consideration. Think it's going to be the best gaming processor ever, and it may not be, and let you down. So that's my rant over. Hopefully you, well, I would say enjoyed this, but please do like, subscribe, and put a comment in the section below, and I will see you all in the next episode of Tech News Update.